I'm just going to say that this entire show should just be Caleb providing narration in the voice that he was doing just before we went on air right now. Caleb, would you like to narrate just this intro really quick?
Well, I'll tell you what we got here is a round table of experts who are going to sit down and tell you all about Space Town.
There it is. That's where we have Space Town. Hello, everyone. This is Trends with Benefits. This is our weekly roundtable tech podcast here at Digital Trends, where we pick a trending tech topic and we give you some history of it, and then we analyze what is going on with it so that you are then maybe more knowledgeable afterward, or at least we hope so. So we've got a lot to talk about today because we're going to be covering what's happening tomorrow, and that is SpaceX launching for the first time in almost 10 years, 2 humans from American soil into space, but also with a private commercial flight. So we're going to be talking about this here today, and we are broadcasting live in addition to being a podcast. You can join in the conversation wherever you are. Let us know what you think as we go throughout the show, but let's introduce our roundtable cast of characters here first. To start off, I'm Greg Nibbler, and to my virtual right, it is
Adrian Warner, aka Hot Nozzle, and according to my outfit, everyone's favorite naturopath.
On 3, folks. 1, 2, 3. Hot
nozzle.
There we go. It's getting there. It's a work in progress. I do love the naturopathic though vibe that you're going for. You know, we're all adapting to quarantine differently, so this is the route that Adrian's taking.
Talk to me if you need supplements.
Just pitch them constantly throughout the show. All right, and to Adrian's virtual right, it is.
I am Caleb Dennison, aka the Whiskey Mist, aka Chicken Bone, aka Spaceman Tex.
Spaceman Tex. That is.
I feel like that one was off the cuff. I like it.
Yeah,
it was. I was thinking of doing something around just the tip, referring to.
You could do an ET phone home.
but I didn't put it together fast enough. Sorry about that.
Caleb, just to explain the finger here and just the tip for those listening via the audio side of things, can you just tell us briefly why you referenced this?
Oh, yeah. I had a little bit of an accident last week. I sliced the nail and part of the tip of my finger off during a freak culinary accident. And it has been all I could talk about or think about for the last several days because it is immensely painful and has required pain medication to manage, which, of course, makes everything way more fun.
Well, Caleb, I'm sorry about the slice. I'm glad you're okay. And excited and scared to see where this podcast is going to go with you on pain medication. So we'll just have to see what happens. Going from Caleb, on the other end of the table, we have.
I am Drew Prindle, aka Professor Prindle. I do the history segments.
Yes, indeed. And that is what we're going to start off with here for this show, is talking a little bit about the history of spaceflight. This is basically a preparatory course for what's going to be going on when they do launch SpaceX, and you can listen to it afterward too. But going back into the history, like to really understand why this is such a big moment here, like to understand where it all started, I think is important. Now I sound like a high school science teacher, but Drew, can you tell us how this all started?
Totally. So the big thing to remember here is that like getting like a rocket to space is one thing, but getting a rocket with people in it to space is like a whole different thing. You have to be much safer because you obviously don't want to kill them. Or there are so many more like safeguards that you have to have in place in order to do crewed space flight. So that's what I put together is just kind of like a timeline of how we got humans in space. So obviously it doesn't start with humans. I actually went down a rabbit hole for this pretty deep. I cannot believe how many monkeys we killed before we started sending humans to space. It's almost depressing, and each one of them has a really messed up story. Like, oh, we just like the parachute didn't work when they were coming back down, or like, oh, we forgot that it was going to land in a desert and they just basically cooked. It's so depressing. But after we learned all of these things about what not to do with humans, we started doing human space flight. So it started with, back in the Cold War. So after Sputnik and all that stuff happened, and we just started this kind of one-upping contest between the US and Russia. It was like, okay, you put a satellite, we're going to put a human in space. Watch this. But unfortunately, the Soviets beat us to it. The first human in space was Yuri Gagarin. He made it up there April 12th, 1961. That was first human in space ever. They really just sent him up past like the theoretical boundary of where, space starts, that's another tricky thing about this. It's still like loosely only agreed upon where space begins and what technically counts as being like in orbit.
Right. It's like 62 miles or something is roughly where they say it is. Is that right?
So 100 kilometers is kind of the like agreed upon one internationally now, but like at the time, the US's like standard was 62 miles. But yeah, I guess that's 100. Yeah,
I just
100
did the
kilometers,
conversion
62
because
miles.
I'm terrible with kilometers. Yeah, it's 62.1 miles.
Yeah, that's more or less.
Apologies
standard.
to the rest of the world.
That 0.1 mile is really important, by the way.
I really screwed that one up. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't make it to space.
Right.
Okay, so shortly after April 12th, 1961, like literally less than a month later, the US is like, screw that, we got to get somebody into space. So we send Alan Shepard up there. He unfortunately does not make it into orbit, only does like suborbital flight. But that was a big deal. That was the first like American in space. And it was a 15-minute flight that was televised. And to our credit, whereas the Russians flew up and then like a capsule release and it came back down on parachutes and all that, Alan Shepard actually flew a spacecraft up and then landed it again. So we still kept the one up going. It was like, well, we did this, and it was viewed by 45 million people on TV, which was pretty neat. It took about a year for us to actually get somebody into orbit, and that was John Glenn on February 20th, 1962. And then between 1961 and 1963, kind of at that point on, there were 6 more manned spaceflight missions in the Mercury project, which was NASA's first, like they created the Mercury project specifically to send humans into space. And then from that point forward, there were kind of a bunch of little milestones peppered in. So 18th of March, 1965, the Russians did the first walk in space. So the first, not just sending somebody in a capsule, but they actually, had the thing orbiting space, and then the person went outside of the spacecraft and walked around in, microgravity, which was pretty cool because you had to have pretty advanced spacesuit technology to do that. Then on December 15th, 1965, we did the first space rendezvous, which was kind of having 2 crafts come and hang out. And they didn't dock together, but they did maintain about a 1-foot distance between each other and prove that we could, if we had like a satellite or something in orbit, we could go up and service it without any issues.
Space rendezvous just sounds so sexy. And then you were like, well, they didn't actually dock together, and I'm just like, oh, okay, all right. So
boy, do I have
really
something
a
for
space rendezvous then?
Well, the first rendezvous and docking in space was on March 16th, 1966. This was Neil Armstrong and David Scott. They did exactly what I described. They flew the Gemini 8 spacecraft up, and they docked with an uncrewed target vehicle that they literally just put into space just to show that they could dock with something there, which was another big milestone, right? And that's kind of set the precedent for the stuff that we eventually came to start doing with the International Space Station, which came a little bit later. But all of this kind of culminates with the event that you guys all know, Apollo 11, July 21st, 1969. We landed on the moon. And that was kind of like the big crescendo, right? Like that was all of that work. It's like, what else could we do at that point? So after we made it to the moon, there were still human space trips going on. What are you laughing about, Caleb?
It's not me. It's Adrian.
I got the giggles.
We're having another.
Show me your docking capability.
Well, that first crew got dock blocked, didn't they?
Oh my God!
Dock blocked.
We're hijacking you.
Minutes
Sorry.
in. We are
actually. You know what? Hold on a second.
Podcast.
Fun story time, because Drew is doing an amazing job, and I'll show
It really
you.
is.
Check this out.
Caleb has gotten, for those listening to the
He's
audio
got
version,
props.
Caleb, once again, is on pain medication, just got up and walked away.
This has
he's
nothing
coming
to
back
do with
with
pain
show and
medication.
tell.
All right, so this is my laser disc of the right
stuff. Oh my
now,
God!
if you haven't seen this movie, like it pretty much takes you through these early stages of space flight, and it characterizes the whole tit for tat with the Russians that was going on, kind of humanizes some of it a little bit. And I mean, it's a 3-hour and 13-minute long movie, so you've got to be in it to win it. It's like 3 laser discs or 2 video cassettes back in the day. But it actually, I mean, from Chuck Yeager all the way through to the end of the missions where, pretty much it stopped with multi-orbitable flights, it really kind of shows that using a mix of actual footage and then Hollywood produced stuff to kind of tell that story. All that to give credit to Drew, who summed up a really huge event that took many years to get through in order to get to where we're at now.
Yeah. So the thing to remember with all of this, though, and I think what makes the SpaceX event that's coming up so significant is all of this stuff was funded primarily by government space agencies. So, like private space flight has until now or until very recently not really been much of a thing. Um, I got to give it to Virgin though, Virgin Galactic, because they do technically have the first like privately funded orbital space flight, right? So they did that with Spaceship Two in 2018. But that was the thing actually that brought up like, what's the boundary of space? Did they make it? And I think that the record keeping organizations are like, yes, they did. So that was the first private space mission. But it was that was just going to the boundary, right? This SpaceX one is going considerably higher, and it also has to dock with the International Space Station and transfer crew members. So there's a little bit more riding on this one.
Yeah, and bring them back too afterward. That's another huge thing. And that's, talking about the history up to there, which is great to get that context. But then where we're at now, with SpaceX doing this mission, and it's been something that's been their goal for a long time. But they ultimately, the ultimate goal of SpaceX is to send people to Mars, because that's actually how it originally even really started. Was Elon Musk wanted to send like a miniature greenhouse to Mars and see what would happen with it. And I was reading up on this earlier today, just the start of SpaceX. It was like back in 2001, and he talked to a Russian missile company, and they wanted to charge $8 million a missile, and he thought that was too expensive. And he's like, I can do these myself. And so that's like how it all kind of like started spiraling from there. There's a lot else that happened. But leading up to where we're at now with this commercial side of things, to where he finally got all this funding and setting stuff up, and then he sent up the Tesla. Was that 2 years ago? I forgot the date. But when he sent the Tesla up, I think that was like the real big signal that commercial space flight is a real possibility. And it started getting all that buzz again, because up until that point, we were still sending people up to space, but there wasn't a lot of talk about it. And like the Russians were sending up, but it wasn't that big of a deal like it has been in this last few years, I feel like.
Yeah, I feel like SpaceX and Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic to a lesser extent have all kind of reignited people's excitement for space travel. And I think the kind of like pinnacle event for reigniting that was Elon Musk sending the Tesla to space.
Yeah.
Because that was just kind of cool. Like this big, it was this big wow moment. It got everybody thinking about it and talking again. And I got to say, it's been super exciting just to watch the rockets being landed. That is what got me interested again. Like, because this is a whole different animal. Before, they were just launching stuff up and, they made it off the launch pad or whatever. Great. But now, A, we have the technology to land them again. And B, we have cameras that can track all that stuff and stream it to the internet. So, like, there's so much more spectacle associated with spaceflight now.
And that's part of the economics behind it, why it's way cheaper now for these commercial organizations to do it than it is for governmental organizations, because they invested in figuring out that reusability factor, because that's like that's the key thing. They reuse these things so they can do it over and over and still save a ton of money comparatively. And Caleb, for this mission in particular, I know that you had taken a look at something like what they're actually doing with this, so people understand what's actually happening tomorrow.
I have no idea, Greg.
Okay.
I have no idea at all. Because I'm not going to make a bunch of excuses. But
all good.
I've been buried in a quagmire of all kinds of interesting stuff. I did want to. I
apologize. I thought that you had said
Drew
that
just brought up though, and I think, I'm old enough to where I remember watching the space shuttle launches, the space shuttle missions, and also the space shuttle landings. In fact, it was very rare that a shuttle took off or landed when we weren't watching on our TVs, at elementary school or whatever. And everybody used to be really excited about that. Towards the end of the shuttle existence, before they just kind of scuttled the shuttle, things were kind of starting to wane, because it seemed like we were doing the same old thing over and over again. And I agree, having reusable rockets, watching them land, and also, stuff like launching a Tesla into space, really starting to make strides towards getting to Mars, talking about maybe going back to the moon again, and even just putting the average Joe up in space. I think is really it's captured this imagination around space and space travel that we lost for like a couple of decades, it feels like to me.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think those big flashy, like showy things that Elon Musk does, love him or hate him. I mean, the guy knows how to get attention and knows how to get people to watch things. And he's accomplished all this so far. I mean, the tech is there, and it took, an entire huge team, but somebody to spearhead that and maybe be laughed at for years until finally it's working out. So for this launch tomorrow, there's a couple of things with it. I mean, just to remind of the firsts for it. So the first one since 2011 to first launching of humans into space, other than I guess Virgin Galactic, but that's okay. Well, we won't count that into orbital space. Since 2011, when the Space Shuttle program did end. Now, the actual pilot of that one back then, he is the same pilot that's going to be on this one tomorrow. So it's going to be the same guy like coming back to do it, which is kind of interesting. Just in that.
Well, it's nice that the guy has a little bit of experience.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You do want people with experience going up into this. So you've got that, and then on top of that, it's the first time the commercial aspect of it, that it's a private space plane that's going to be doing that. So it's Douglas Hurley is the pilot who was there before. Robert Benkin is the other guy that's going up tomorrow, and they're going to dock with the International Space Station. All that's going to happen, and then there's specific experiments that are going to go on. But it's a huge moment just looking at it for that aspect, just to give some context of it. But there's other things too. When we talk about space travel right now, we're going to get into what this could mean for the future and what's going on and some of the other contracts. But specifically for this mission, I think one of the things that SpaceX and Tesla have done is they've made it cool, but they've made the space program cool again. And that's one of the things, even down to the uniforms, which are actually pretty different. I know, Adrian, you've got some details on that side of things.
Yeah, it's like you guys are talking about how everything kind of is getting like a more attention and more spectacle. And the spacesuits, also the Dragon capsule, like they've gotten a really cool kind of facelift. So I have like a bunch of information on the spacesuits. I really geeked out because they're so cool and so sleek looking and so different from everything that NASA has had its astronauts wear up until this point, and also other agencies like in Russia, their astronauts and whatnot. So the Starman SpaceX suits are really stylish. Obviously, if you look at them, they're just a one-piece, two-layer pressure jumpsuits, and people were trying to dispute how effective they are. And Elon Musk actually like jumped onto Instagram and claimed that you can jump into a vacuum chamber and be fine. So he's like, these work, but they are intended for intravehicular use only, so you can't use them on a spacewalk. But they have a bunch of really cool features in them, like that are really, really futuristic. And they have been tested out twice on dummies. So they did go up on Starman, the guy or the dummy that was driving the Tesla vehicle back in 2018 when they launched that. And then it was also on the dummy that they called Ripley, which was on the uncrewed SpaceX Crew Dragon demo back in 2019. So the whole thing is like, we've seen this over and over again. We didn't know, like, is this the official, Tesla suit that people are going to wear? And it totally is. They're super customized. They're supposed to be super lightweight and functional. And they have like a cool, like pointing to my body, which you can't see. They have a connection point on the suit's thigh that attaches to life support systems. So they're like, you can wear them in the space shuttle, and then if it loses pressure or if there's an emergency, it's supposed to keep you alive for a certain amount of time. And then the helmet too is 3D printed. It's totally custom. It has a bunch of integrated valves and mechanisms, so it can like lock the visor and retract it and lock it. And then it has microphones in it as well. I think it's just really neat, and I feel like it looks like a Stig suit kind of from.
It does, just a little bit.
Totally. And it actually, the design is super unique because it was designed by a legendary Hollywood costume designer. His name is Jose Fernandez, and designed costumes for Wonder Woman, Wolverine, Batman versus Superman, and Captain America. So you've seen his designs, and now it's going to be on these astronauts that are going to space, and that is so cool.
That is awesome.
I will say though, like if you were an astronaut and you're like, oh, don't worry, your suit was designed by this guy who's done stuff for like Wonder Woman, I'd be like,
Back up.
dial that back a minute.
They will be using different suits for actual spacewalking. So they're going to be using what NASA calls the EMU, which is the extravehicular mobility unit. So that is like a full microgravity activity, full vacuum protection against everything and including radiation. So that keeps you protected for 8 to 10 hours. And then these Tesla suits or SpaceX suits, sorry, are just to be worn in the shuttle.
Still though, they're awesome looking.
Yeah, they're super awesome looking. And you know what else is awesome looking is the new NASA logo, which is technically the old logo. That's going to be, I love it too. Yeah, the worm is what they call it. And it actually debuted back in 1975. And they're bringing it back. It's making it come back. And this actually got announced about a month ago. But, you know, with everything that's going on in the world, I don't know how much people really paid attention. But it's going to be on the spacesuits. It's going to be on the side of the rocket that's launching as well. So people are really, really in love with this. It's a huge piece of nostalgia for people. And it's just a really cool piece of design on top of the cool, you know, tech that the suit is built around.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, it's nostalgic. It reminds me of that when I was a kid, I wanted to go to space camp.
Yeah, everybody wants to go to space camp.
Yeah, everybody wants to go to space camp. It's cool. But these suits, you know, that is one other just aspect. I mean, clearly the scientific function is there. I think that's amazing that it's 3D printed because that's something that's probably they're testing out that we'll see more of going forward. I don't know if they already do some of that, but I mean, I would imagine that's going to become more and more important with 3D printing. But then, yeah, just the design. I mean, the design is cool looking. I mean, I keep saying it, but it just is. It brings more attention to it, and I think it brings more attention to the space program in general. Which, taking a look at that and going forward, you know, to where it's going to go, like this is the first one, you know, this demo 2. So what happens is if it's successful, they tested out all kinds of different things for emergencies too. So if something were to go wrong, like they've got this really state-of-the-art system to where the Dragon crew capsule will launch off of the rocket immediately, so to keep the crew safe and then just parachute back down. But you know, assuming everything goes right, goes up, comes back down, then they'll be certified for human travel, and that just like opens the gates for all the other stuff that they want to do. And that's where NASA has these private contracts now that are in place, looking forward to the moon project with the Artemis project of bringing you know, moon travel back and bringing people to the moon and establishing bases. They're looking to private companies for that. They've got contracts with, I think it's the competition right now is SpaceX, Blue Origin, and then some other company called Dynetics, which I don't know much about them. Not Dynetics, just to clarify.
It's a winning name. Like if you're going to be a space company, you better have like a Z or an X in your name somewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. There's something. I mean, I'm sure they're very established. I'm just not familiar with them. But there's something that seems very futuristic, like sci-fi, almost sinister about that name. And that's no accusation about the company. Just saying Dynetics. That seems like something.
It's a little close to the whole L. Ron Hubbard thing.
I think that's probably where that's coming from.
Xenu,
where I'm
body thetans, you know, that kind of deal.
Well, you gotta watch out for thetans, or no, you want them. I can't remember. But anyway, those are three examples. So private companies that are saying like, hey, design us a moon lander, design us a rover. You guys come up with it, and then we'll pay you for that. And I guess that's kind of the question I have. Do we think that is a good thing overall? Like, I know it's advancing things faster, but is it good to have all these private companies involved, or should it be governments that are actually funding this and only in that way? Caleb, I want to hear your version of this.
So, I mean, I've enjoyed kind of watching, you know, all the various branches of military and how they've been feeding up into NASA and NASA as a whole, pushing us forward, you know, in the space race back in the early days, right up through all the shuttle missions and then partnerships for the International Space Station. But I think we all know that at a certain point, governmental involvement probably involves a lot of red tape. There's sometimes questions about the accountability of where funds go. And, you know, I mean, it can be a sluggish thing with so much oversight and so many different people wanting to sign off on certain decisions that need to be made. I think that privatizing this stuff has actually been a good move. Also, I mean, it's one less it's one less thing to just point the blame at government for, if there is an accident, if there is a failure or whatever. There's a lot more people involved now. Um, and also, anytime you inspire competition, you tend to spur innovation. And I think that, when people are competing for opportunities and contracts and stuff like that, it helps push innovation. I think we're actually making more progress now, at a faster pace than we have in ever before, in this particular regard. And I think, letting it go in, to different private companies, has been a big part of that.
Yeah, I got to agree with you on that one. I think like it was the space race that like kind of kicked up the competition and drove both parties to actually like, turn up the dial on how fast they were iterating and inventing and just pushing the envelope on space exploration technologies. And then once that kind of, withered away and there wasn't that competition anymore, we saw it like, budgets sort of dried up. There wasn't as much interest in this sort of stuff. We were still going to space, but it didn't have the same like pace or excitement to it. And in a way, moving it to the private sector has kind of reignited that because it's like now it's not governments fighting each other; it's these private companies trying to, do things faster, cheaper, better, so that they can win more government contracts to go to space.
Yeah, now it's all just friendly competition. And I just don't see it, going back to the way it used to be. Like, that's just not something that's going to happen or it's feasible the way that things are right now.
Yeah, where these companies are taking on some of that risk, and not to sugarcoat it like I did maybe a little bit earlier, but it is very hard to send two people into space to hook up with a space station that's traveling at however many thousands of miles an hour. So there is a lot of risk involved, but these companies know that, and I feel like they're putting in a lot of time and effort to mitigate any of those risks as much as possible. So I think you're right. I think this is good overall. That it's not going to change regardless of good or bad. This is how it's going to be. So, which does lead us to our one thing, which obviously Blue Origin and SpaceX are two at the forefront of this, which means we're going to have Elon Musk with his battalion in space and Jeff Bezos with his battalion. At some point, it's all going to be controlled by them. This is how I see the sci-fi movie in real life playing out. So Elon Musk versus Bezos, who's going to win in the future impending space war? That's my question.
Well, I'll step up real quick, and I'll say, I mean, there's a difference between the space battle and the space war, right? I think Elon Musk wins the war because he's already got Spaceman Spiff out there circling around, and right now it just seems like a dummy in a roadster. But I'm pretty sure it's a Trojan horse for something else. And at the last minute, he's going to come through and I don't know, the AI will have created an actual person that will dominate everyone and everything. I don't know. I'm still working on the plot line for this. It's going to be my first novel. Hopefully it gets
Love this
up,
theory.
made into a script, and then, ultimately there'll be a movie and I'll be rich. That's the end goal. But no, I think, maybe Musk has this. I think he's just that crazy.
Yeah.
By the way, while we were talking, and I'll just drop this real quick. I was like, where is Starman right now? And apparently there's some really cool sites that will show you exactly where Starman is, when he will get close to Mars, and then when he's close to the Earth again. If you haven't thought about that, but you are curious, there are a few different sites out there that show that, and you should check it out. It's pretty cool.
Where's he at right now?
Space.
We'll take
Go
a
ahead,
look.
Drew. What were you gonna say?
I was gonna say, oh, he's in space. I was just being a smart
He's in
ass.
space. No, he's further out from the sun than Mars is right now on his particular orbit. Technically, Starman is chasing Mars, and going, hundreds of thousands of miles per hour and getting closer all the time. But it's still, I think the closest he ends up getting to Mars is sometime in October of this year, and then again close enough to Earth in December.
Right.
But yeah, you gotta go check it out. There's a couple of different cool sites. The one I'm on right now that you could check out, and this is no plug, is spaceinthreed.com. Starman.
spaceand3d.com.
It's got a pretty cool interactive map that shows you.
All right, so check that out to see about Starman. I just realized we're out of time too, so we'll have to continue on our Elon Musk versus Jeff Bezos space war talk again. But although it's hard to top Caleb with his screenplay that he's writing, I think the hero's name was Tex Spaceman or something like that from the beginning of the show. So that's clearly got to be it. We'll look for that movie soon. But thank you to everybody for joining us too. Again, this is Trends with Benefits. This is our weekly Roundtable Tech podcast. So we are available as the audio version. You can go click download, subscribe to that, get the episodes every week. We'll have tons of coverage too at Digital Trends over all this, the SpaceX launch and everything that's going on with it. We're rebroadcasting it. So we've got everything happening with that. So you can follow along there, hit subscribe. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with another episode. Space Wednesday.